It was January 18, 1980, a cold winter evening in Giles County, Virginia. An 18-year-old woman named Laura Sherback, her husband, and a group of friends decided to explore New River Cave. This cave was known for its winding passages and striking limestone formations. It was a popular destination for casual cavers because no vertical rope work was required. It seemed like the perfect place to spend the night underground. The cave was also known as a wet cave, since water seeps through it and creates limestone formations. Water in caves often shapes beautiful, abstract rocks. However, it also carves out dangerously sharp edges and points. When climbing above such formations, one must exercise extreme caution. The group arrived around 7 p.m., carrying camping gear. They planned to explore the cave's depths and settle in for an overnight adventure. Excitement buzzed among them as they moved deeper into the cold, damp passageways. At first, the journey was uneventful, just 2,000 feet of crawling, climbing, and weaving through tight corridors. But everything changed when they reached a narrow section known as the blowhole. The floor here was a mix of loose sediment and slick, uneven limestone shaped by centuries of flowing water. Patches of moisture clung to the rock, making every step a potential hazard. The passage narrowed just beyond the blowhole, forcing Laura Sherback to carefully maneuver her way upward with both hands and legs stretched out, taking support from the cave walls. At just 18 years old, she was eager but inexperienced, relying on instinct and balance to navigate the treacherous terrain. Then it happened. Her boots suddenly lost traction on a damp, slanted rock. Before she could react, her body lurched downward. Her arms flailed in the suffocating darkness, grasping at nothing but empty air. Gravity ripped her downward. Her legs spread wide apart in a desperate attempt to regain control, but there was no saving herself. A sharp limestone outcrop speared upward from the cavern floor, its edge as unforgiving as a knife. She landed hard. Her legs were spread apart. A wet, sickening thud echoed through the tunnel, followed by a sharp, guttural scream that tore through the silence. The impact drove deep into her lower abdomen, sending a shuddering ripple of pain through her body. She slumped forward, gasping. Blood was already seeping through her clothing. The agony was immediate, like a blade twisting inside her. Her world had just turned into a nightmare. The realization set in. She had landed hard, her pelvis slamming into the jagged formation beneath her. A sharp protrusion ripped through her lower abdomen and vaginal region, tearing into her flesh like a blade. The impact wasn't from a great height, only a few feet, but the damage was catastrophic. The pain was immediate and paralyzing, like white-hot metal being driven into her core. The raw, exposed tissue throbbed violently with every heartbeat, and a growing dampness soaked through her clothing. Her companions rushed to her side, chaotic shadows dancing across the cavern walls. When they pulled back her clothing to assess the injury, they were met with a horrifying sight. Torn vaginal tissue hung loosely, eviscerated by the impact. There was also the terrifying possibility of pelvic fractures. Laura gasped in shallow, uneven breaths. Shock was beginning to set in. Her limbs trembled. Her pulse was weak but rapid, a desperate attempt from her body to compensate for rapid blood loss. The cold air of the cave intensified her shivering, her body fighting against the creeping embrace of hypothermia. Her friends knew they had to move quickly. Two of them raced back through the cave, navigating the long, twisting tunnels to find help. Meanwhile, the others did what they could. They stripped away her wet clothes and placed her in a down sleeping bag, trying to conserve her body heat. But the pain was unbearable. Every tiny movement sent fresh waves of agony through her shredded abdomen. Her breathing became ragged, her consciousness flickering. She drifted in and out of the darkness of the cave, merging with the black void pressing in from the edges of her vision. By 10 p.m., word had finally reached the Giles County Rescue Squad, who immediately sprang into action. But just as the response effort began, a devastating setback emerged. The two men who had made the exhausting climb out of the cave to seek help were now disoriented and unable to recall the exact path back to Laura's location. The twisting, unmarked tunnels of New River Cave had turned into a cruel maze. Every passage looked the same, and in their panic, the details of the route had blurred in their minds. Time was slipping away. Rescue teams, including trained cavers from the VPI grotto, were dispatched, but progress was slow. They crawled through low tunnels, making their way to the scene. With every passing minute, the weight of uncertainty grew heavier. Had she already succumbed to her injuries? Had the cold taken her? Was she even conscious enough to cry out for help? Then, at last, they found her. She was barely clinging to consciousness. Her once labored breaths had turned dangerously shallow, each one a fragile whisper. Her body was on the verge of total shutdown, a clear sign of severe hypovolemic shock. Her body was struggling, failing to keep vital organs functioning as her blood loss continued unchecked. Her skin was ice cold, slick with sweat, and her lips had taken on a bluish hue. Hypothermia was setting in. The combination of blood loss and the cave's unforgiving cold had drained what little strength remained in her trembling limbs. Her body was shutting down piece by piece. If they didn't move quickly, she wouldn't make it out alive. Medical personnel administered N4, pumping fluids into her failing system. The wounded areas were sterilized and carefully bandaged. But any movement still sent rippling shocks of pain through her core. She tried to scream, but her throat was too dry, too weak. Her body was failing her one system at a time. The next step was the most agonizing: evacuation. They placed her onto a Stokes litter, a stretcher designed for extreme conditions. The rescuers had to carry her through tight crawlways, over jagged climbs, and down narrow rock channels, all while keeping her motion as minimal as possible. With every jostle, a fresh spike of agony burned through her gut. It felt like her insides were being torn apart over and over again. Her mind blurred in and out of focus, her vision clouded by shock and exhaustion. Over 25 rescuers worked together to carry her out, their bodies pressed against the cave walls as they passed her along like a fragile piece of glass. At one section, they had to lie down in a column, forming a human conveyor belt to carefully move her through a cramped passage. Each movement was agony. Her battered body struggled against the torment. The rescuers did their best, but even the most delicate hands couldn't prevent the searing pain from radiating through her torn flesh. By 5 a.m., nearly 9 hours after her accident, Laura finally emerged from the cave. She was immediately shifted to an ambulance. The ride to Montgomery County Hospital was a blur of 4 drips, flashing red lights, and murmured medical jargon. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her body fighting against the shock and blood loss. By the time she arrived, a full trauma team was waiting. The moment the stretcher rolled through the hospital doors, she was surrounded doctors assessing the extent of her injuries, nurses working swiftly to stabilize her failing vitals. The damage was severe. The fall had torn through delicate tissue, causing extensive internal trauma. The loss of blood had pushed her to the edge of organ failure. But the worst part, the most horrifying part, was knowing that it all could have been avoided. The fall was small. The injury was catastrophic. Caves are merciless. The beauty of underground formations hides sharp, deadly edges. All it takes is one misstep, one wrong move, to turn a simple trip into a nightmare of pain and suffering. That was the first story. Now let me tell you the second. This one highlights how crucial it is to consider all natural factors when caving. A small misjudgment can lead to a catastrophic nightmare that one would only pray to end. On March 15, 2004, a group prepared to descend into Cueva de Alacrán, a vast cave system in the Cuautitlán region of Mexico. The team was part of the Combined Services Caving Association, or CSCA. The men were Jonathan Sims, Charles Milton, Simon Cornhill, Chris Mitchell, John Rowe, and Toby Hamnett. These were current and former British Armed Service members, experienced in underground exploration, and they had spent years mapping this particular system. Their plan was straightforward: reach Camp 1, a pre-established base about 1 kilometer inside the cave, conduct survey work, and return after their shift. The cave had been systematically explored for years, and this expedition was another step in their long-term efforts. The weather had been damp but not alarming when they entered the cave that morning. The region was prone to sudden rainfall, but they were well aware of the risks. They knew the entrance passages could flood after heavy rain, sometimes taking days to drain. That was why Camp 1 had been strategically chosen. It was in a dry passage beyond the flood-prone sections. The team carried food, radios, and emergency gear, ensuring they could endure an unexpected delay if necessary. They descended into the cave, each man focused on his task. The darkness was total, pierced only by the beams of their headlamps. The floor was slick with moisture, the air cool and still. The team moved with precision, navigating tight corridors and climbing over jagged rock formations. They reached Camp 1 after several hours, settled in, unpacked their gear, and began their planned work. There was no sense of urgency or alarm. They had done this many times before. By March 17, 2004, the first signs of trouble came. The team on the surface attempted to send a relief crew into the cave. Heavy rain had fallen the previous night, and when the new team reached the entrance passage, they found it completely flooded. The sump, an underwater section that could form during extreme weather, had blocked access. The surface team radioed Camp 1 and informed the trapped men. There was no immediate panic. The team was prepared for this scenario. They had enough food, they had a dry shelter, and they had a communication link to the outside world. The best course of action was to wait. By the next morning, the water had not receded. Instead, it had risen. What had begun as a manageable delay was evolving into something much more dangerous. The men at Camp 1 began to ration their food more strictly. Though they had prepared for a flood, they had never expected to be trapped for an extended period. Their calculations had been based on previous flooding patterns, but now nature was proving unpredictable. The radio crackled with updates from the surface. More rain was expected. The realization settled in. They could be here for days. The air inside the chamber grew damp, making it harder to breathe. Sleep came in brief, uneasy bursts, broken by the sound of water dripping relentlessly from the cave walls. The darkness, once familiar and comforting, now felt suffocating. It had been 5 days since the team entered the cave. The rain outside had not stopped. Water seeped into the chamber, pooling in the lower sections. The men repositioned themselves on higher ground, using their remaining dry gear to create barriers against the creeping dampness. Their food supply was dwindling faster than anticipated. The portions were now minimal, just enough to keep them functional. The physical effects of hunger began to set in. Muscles ached. Lightheadedness became common. Even simple tasks like checking the radio or adjusting their gear required more effort than before. Time blurred. The absence of sunlight disoriented them, and their bodies ached from inactivity. The weight of the mountain above them, the silent pressure of tons of rock, became oppressive. The surface team, growing increasingly desperate, attempted to get Mexican rescue teams involved. However, none of the available divers had the specialized training required to navigate the submerged passage safely. The only hope now rested on British divers who had been contacted but had not yet arrived. March 23, 2004. By now, panic had begun to settle in. The air inside the chamber felt stagnant, thick with humidity and the scent of unwashed bodies. The men were constantly damp, their clothing sticking to their skin, the cold seeping into their bones. Jonathan Sims, normally composed, found himself struggling to suppress growing anxiety. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined the flooded passage, the inescapable wall of water separating them from the outside world. Chris Mitchell, whose hands had grown unsteady from lack of nutrition, barely spoke. The silence between them was oppressive. Their bodies were weakening. The rations had been reduced to the bare minimum, a few bites of food, just enough to keep them from collapsing. Water was still available, but it was cold and metallic tasting. The radio updates had grown sporadic. The surface team could do little beyond offering words of reassurance. The divers were on their way, but the men underground knew that if the rain continued, the rescue might not be possible. March 24th arrived with no significant change in the situation. The water levels remained stubbornly high, and the cavers, now deep into their 8th day underground, were beginning to show signs of physical and mental strain. Despite their preparations, the prolonged stay in the cave had drained their energy reserves. Their rations, though carefully managed, were dwindling. The damp environment had taken its toll, leaving their bodies chilled and their movements sluggish. Sleep was erratic, broken by the need to check water levels and the unshakable anxiety that help might not arrive in time. Above ground, the British cave divers Rick Stanton and Jason Mallinson had arrived and were making final preparations for the rescue attempt. They reviewed the maps, checked their equipment meticulously, and waited for the right moment to begin their perilous journey through the flooded passage. The tension was palpable. Any mistake could mean disaster, not only for the rescuers but also for the trapped men relying on them. By the morning of March 25th, the decision was made to move forward. Stanton and Mallinson entered the water, pushing through the narrow submerged tunnels, carefully following the pre-rigged guideline. The passage was treacherous, with poor visibility and tight squeezes that made maneuvering with their equipment incredibly difficult. Every movement had to be calculated. A snagged line, a misplaced fin kick stirring up silt, or a failed air supply could be fatal. After what felt like an eternity, they reached Camp 1. The 6 trapped cavers greeted them with a mixture of immense relief and urgency. They were exhausted, but there was no time to waste. The divers distributed additional air tanks and gave precise instructions. Each caver would be guided one at a time through the flooded tunnel, a task that would take hours to complete. One by one, the cavers submerged into the frigid water, their survival now entirely dependent on their own composure and the expertise of their rescuers. The journey back was grueling. The visibility was almost non-existent, forcing them to rely on touch and memory to navigate. Every second spent underwater was an agonizing battle against panic, against the primal urge to thrash and flee. The narrowest sections forced them to inch through while holding their breath, the weight of the water pressing against them, the darkness suffocating. After 9 painstaking hours, the entire group, now free from the cave's grip, stumbled toward the exit. As they surfaced into the open air, they were met with a blinding storm of camera flashes, reporters shouting over one another, and Mexican officials scrutinizing their every move. The relief of survival was quickly overshadowed by the political chaos awaiting them outside. Though physically unharmed, the ordeal had taken its toll. They were escorted to a military hospital for evaluation, where the weight of the past 8 days finally settled in. They had survived against the odds, but the repercussions of their expedition were only just beginning to unfold. In the days that followed, the situation escalated. The Mexican government, fueled by mounting public outrage and media speculation, detained the entire expedition team, questioning them about their true intentions in the cave. The presence of military personnel in the caving group, along with their radon testing equipment, led to unfounded accusations of secretive geological exploration. The cavers, exhausted and confused, were now embroiled in an international scandal. The British government was forced to intervene diplomatically, negotiating for the safe release of their citizens. Meanwhile, news outlets ran wild with speculation. Were the cavers spies? Were they illegally mining for valuable resources? Every conceivable theory was thrown into the public sphere, further straining relations between the two countries. After 3 days of intense questioning, the cavers were formally charged with failing to disclose the scientific nature of their trip and not possessing the necessary research permits. Though no concrete evidence of wrongdoing was ever presented, they were expelled from Mexico, banned from returning, and escorted to a flight back to the United Kingdom under diplomatic watch. Back home, the team faced a different kind of scrutiny. Some praised them for their survival against the odds, while others criticized their actions, questioning the wisdom of their expedition. The media storm eventually subsided, but the experience left a lasting mark on all involved. 2 stories, 2 different caves, 2 different kinds of horror. One woman impaled on a limestone blade in Virginia, surviving only because of 25 rescuers and 9 hours of agony. 6 men trapped for 8 days in a flooded Mexican cave, saved by expert divers, then thrown into a political nightmare. Caves do not care about your experience, your preparation, or your courage. They only care about the laws of physics, the sharpness of their edges, and the weight of the water. And sometimes, just sometimes, they let you walk away so you can tell the story. I just told you two of them. Pray you never have to live through one of your own.